Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for Ask the Expert in North Texas. I'm Kristen Diaz.
I'm David Rankin. Yesterday, Elon Musk told Fox News he stopped the federal government from snooping on direct messages when he bought Twitter. He also says there are more changes coming to Twitter in the next couple of days, and the site is now breaking even, maybe. What is the future of Twitter as a social media platform? On today's Ask the Expert, we're joined by our tech expert and freelance journalist, Ian Sherr. He's in the KRLD Zoom room. Ian, thank you so much for the time.
Thanks for having me.
Do you buy the whole concept that Musk stopped the feds from spying on us through Twitter, even through our DMs?
Look, I think that it is not beyond reason to say that it's tough to take him at his word every time he says something. We've had too many instances now where Musk has said one thing and it's turned out that factually, literally at that exact same time, that was not what was going on. And so is it possible? Absolutely. I mean, just take what we learned from Edward Snowden 10 years ago now and what was going on in terms of the government's capabilities to read our emails, to be able to read and follow our phone messages and everything. Yeah, it totally lives within the realm of reason. Is it what's happening? I don't know. And unfortunately, without a smoking gun or literally him showing us the files, which, you know, he could do if he wanted to, but he hasn't. We don't actually know whether this is true.
I'm curious if it's a misconception that our personal messages are secure from others to see.
Oh, absolutely. They're not secure. And you should never trust messaging on any social network. We have seen, if you read, for example, excellent book written by two New York Times reporters about Facebook when they were going through all the really tough stuff a couple of years ago, right? One of the things we learned from that book was that they were able to read the messages that were being done inside of Facebook. There is also indications. We've seen photos that were during, you remember the Twitter files, right? This was an independent journalist who was brought on to essentially talk about the old version of Twitter before Elon Musk and kind of trash all of that stuff. He actually published a photo that showed that it seemed like the content moderation teams at least had an ability to go into your direct messages. So look, the reality is, of course, none of the stuff is safe from these companies. Does that mean that they're going to just, go into your messages with abandon and they don't care? And no, they have to have you trust them at least enough that you're using their platforms. So I don't know what the right answer is, right? I think that the reality is if you're worried about this type of stuff, then yeah, you shouldn't be trusting these people with your information. That's for sure.
There are some stories that have come out lately in the last couple of days talking about, for example, how Twitter is going to handle hate speech, that it won't ban it, but it's going to be more limited in scope, but it's not getting banned off of the site. Is this the whole part of the Elon Musk believing in free speech?
To a degree, right? I mean, he came on Twitter saying that he was going to be this free speech champion, right? And kind of return Twitter to its position back from, we'll call it 2014-ish, right? Where it was the free speech wing of the free speech movement is what people used to call it. But the truth is that a lot of people who've been following the world of social media feel like he's just repeating a lot of the stuff that we saw Facebook and YouTube and Twitter learn over the last decade, right? This idea of reducing reach, but allowing speech is fundamental to the way Twitter used to work. And even if you go back a couple of years ago, I would argue that some people on Capitol Hill would call that shadow banning, right? And so now we've gotten to a point where he's got the keys to the car. He realizes that there are parts of it that are not exactly working the way he thought it was. And he needs to actually moderate stuff. He can't just let people say whatever they want. And so now he's doing, okay, well, you know what, that shadow banning thing, I'm not going to call it that because everyone's going to hate me if I do, but I'm going to do essentially what that was because, yeah, that does make sense in some cases. So I don't know. I don't know what it's going to turn into, but I do know that a lot of experts look at him and say, gosh, if only he'd listened to the original Twitter employees before he fired them all.
I'm curious, going back to the security of our messages, will Twitter Blue add any protection? And how is this also different from, for example, Apple allowing the FBI into users' devices?
So first off, the answer to Twitter Blue, no clue, right? I mean, literally stuff that Elon Musk has promised that would be in Twitter Blue still haven't happened, like having half as many ads or stuff like that. None of that's happened. And that's, I mean, it's not a ding on him directly, right? Like maybe he just hasn't had the time or the energy, or maybe he's decided not to. But he changes his mind so often, it's hard to actually keep track of what Twitter Blue is supposed to be, which is, by the way, his subscription service that's supposed to save the company. So the thing about your messages, one of the things to keep in mind is that there are instances where the tech industry has actually proven its mettle, if you will, in protecting your messages from the government. And the best example of that actually comes from Apple, right? And you may remember they went up against the FBI. This was back 2015, I think it was 2016, after the San Bernardino terrorist, right, the shooter, that his phone was taken by the FBI. They tried to get into it. It was encrypted, which means all the data was jumbled up and behind a password, and they couldn't get into it. And they asked Apple, hey, you got to help us, right? We're the FBI. We have a warrant. We want this. And Apple said, we don't have a way to break into our phones. And in fact, we don't plan to build one. And we don't think that you should be allowed to force us to build a way to crack into our phones. That's not American. That's not right. And it turned into this big court battle, right? And so Apple, at the end of it, you can debate how you feel about them, but they were able to point to that and say, hey, look, we didn't agree with the government. And in fact, we didn't even work with them. And they ended up having to go to this Israeli security firm that cracks other people's iPhones for like, terrible regimes all around the world. That's how the FBI got into it. So, that's one example. There are companies like Signal, by the way, Telegram, WhatsApp, who have also kind of bet the farm, as it were, right? Made their name on offering you secure communications. iMessage from Apple obviously is similar. That's different from the way that Facebook and Twitter and YouTube do messaging. And, there's starting to be kind of a thing where they're all overlapping. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, now called Meta, has said that he wants all of our messages to be encrypted, which means, in theory, not government accessible. But, a lot of people trust him about as far as they can throw him. So I don't know.
Other issues in dealing with Twitter in the last couple of days, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and NPR pulling down their pages because of Twitter labeling them as government-funded media. In fact, today, Musk said he changed the tag to the CBC for 69% government-funded media, which is accurate, but it still has that label to it.
Yes, and it proves that no matter how rich you are, you can't buy being funny, because obviously he's trying to make an internet joke. But the thing is that they haven't pulled down their pages, to be clear. They just have stopped using Twitter, and they've said, look, we're not going to participate in a platform that undermines our credibility. And a lot of media insiders, and I admit I read a lot of those media insiders, and arguably I'm one of them as well, would argue that he is conflating different ways of funding and different ways of working to undermine, nationally recognized media publications that often make him upset, right? And make his friends upset. And that's frustrating, right? It feels like suddenly there's an agenda here that is, very different from the debates that were happening before about social networking, where it was, are they trying to reduce bad speech so much that they're starting to hurt conservative voices? Are they doing all these other things? This is now becoming a thing of taking media and literally delegitimizing it on the platform. And so CBC standing up, a lot of people are cheering for them for that. Same thing with NPR. And honestly, I'm not surprised that they've done that. New York Times as well has started kind of getting upset about the fact that they took away its blue check mark, right? Even though it doesn't matter, and like they don't want the blue check mark. What they want is not to be actively delegitimized, and let their work show for itself, right? And let who they are stand for itself, and don't just put effort into making them less than they are. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. I imagine that this is just the beginning. I imagine a number of media organizations are going to say, you know what, we're done. It's not worth the trouble. It doesn't produce, even though Elon Musk says that Twitter is very important to media, the amount of data, and we've seen it from all sorts of publications, Twitter does not refer a lot of people to news articles. So they don't have a financial reason to do it. It's just literally because a lot of people were on Twitter, and the president of the United States was on Twitter. And so, yeah, why wouldn't you? But now a lot of people are leaving because they're upset.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that specifically. I mean, we talk a little bit about the bullying of these corporations or, these organizations, but for just everyday users, are they truly losing interest in Twitter, or are they kind of like, well, if it doesn't happen to me, or it's not going to happen to me, so they have this, careless attitude toward it?
But, there are a couple of data points I want to think about, right? One is that it's impossible almost to tell how many people are real on Twitter, right? We learned that before when there was discussion about bots. And in fact, researchers continually tell us that even though the companies think they know how many bots are on their platforms, they don't really. There's ever more research that shows that, normal people, and I'm air quoting here, are not actually normal people. They might be working on behalf of a regime that's trying to influence American opinion, or vice versa, blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot to think about there, right? The next thing also to think about is that, okay, let's say there are normal people on Twitter, all right? I'm sure there's at least 6 of them. Are those people upset? Well, the reality is that the indications we've seen are that the people who were prone to support Musk at this point are very happy, right? And the people who were not likely to agree with him are very unhappy, but they're still using Twitter. I would argue probably that when all is said and done, the number of people using Twitter might have dipped. He has not given us data, and he has not given us data that is comparable, so I can't even trust the data he's given us. But he says that usage is at an all-time high. I do believe him there. So the question is, okay, are people actually using it, and is it still influential? Right now, it's still influential, right? We're talking about it right here. We're spending how many minutes talking about it on you only have so many minutes in the day you can dedicate to your newscast on this. So that says something, right? I don't know what it'll mean, though, in 6 months, in a year. And if he continues to chase people away and upset the people who actually build the platform, right? The journalists, the politicians, the celebrities, then eventually its reason for being is going to disappear.
Speaking of which, on Thursday, the legacy blue check marks are supposed to go away. He said that they were going to go away on April 1st. Now it's 420 where these blue checks are going to go away. Is the blue check going to end up being more like a scarlet letter anymore? It says only people that have paid for Twitter Blue have the blue checks. And,
that is its own. Yeah. And in fact, scarlet letter, you make a very good point there, right? Is that a number of people have actually looked at, part of the promise of blue check marks now is not just, oh, you're supposedly important. That's what it was before. And by the way, for the record, and I've written before, I don't care about my blue check mark. I know a lot of people say, well, yeah, it's easy to say you don't care when you have one, but no, I'm not going to pay for it for the future either, for the record. But the other thing is that I think what has been really interesting is that the blue checkmark now supposedly gets you into the For You tab, right? It gets you to the top of conversations and all that stuff. And so there have been now people who follow whenever there's someone who tweets supportive of Elon Musk, right? There's an argument happening, everyone's angry at him, and someone tweets out support. Suddenly someone says, oh yeah, that person paid for Twitter Blue. They're silly enough to pay $11 just to be a part of this conversation, right? And so actually it does have a scarlet letter aspect to it. When April 20th happens, we'll be able to say again, if he takes away all the blue check marks from people who won't pay, like myself, we'll be able to say, well, are those people legitimately, influential, important, meaningful people who are beyond just being who they are And everyone has a voice and everyone deserves a voice. But I'm talking about regulators, lawmakers, right? People who are actually making impact in the world on a daily basis that affects millions of people every day, right? Not just having a voice. Are those the real people who are on Twitter, or is it just the people yelling at each other? And that's going to be the real question at that point.
Ian Sherr is a freelance journalist and our tech expert here on Ask the Expert. Ian, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.